Welcome to the continuing winemaker series here at the Wine of the Month Club. And wow, what an honor this morning to have Markus
Bokisch, yeah.
that too, Bokisch, with such an interesting story from Lodi. But tell us a little bit about the history of the winery, because you said you brought Spanish varietals to Lodi, which they're amazing wines.
Thank you.
Particularly since you don't see Spanish varietals in Lodi very often.
That's right.
But tell us the history of that. How did that come about?
Well, that came about years ago. Essentially, it all started out back in Davis, where I had been studying for international ag development as well as plant sciences, and my wife-to-be was studying there French. And when we met each other, we thought, oh, this is a great relationship, but we're at our very last year of college. And she was already on her way to Spain to teach English. And so I was on my way, of all places, to Guatemala to go into the Peace Corps. And we put all of our, I know, we put everything on hold and said, where can we get a job and just see how this relationship is going to go. And Napa Valley, as many people know, is right next to Davis. And so we went to Davis, and I was very fortunate with my plant science degree to be able to become a viticulturist for Joseph Phelps Vineyards. And I was there for 3 years, and then the two of us moved to Spain. Of course, I wanted to go to Spain because my family on my mother's side is originally from Spain. We're all Catalans from the Barcelona area, just south. And so we moved to Catalonia, worked in the Penedès region, and I was given a very interesting job, which was to go ahead and collect all these different varietal cuttings from all over the Iberian Peninsula and bring them over to Catalonia to see how they would do. So Albarino from Galicia, Graciano from Navarra, Rioja, all of these things brought to the Penedès. And they worked out really well. So when
put
we
them in
moved,
your suitcase and take them to Lodi? Is that what you ended up doing?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good.
That collection was just too good to leave behind.
Yeah, right.
So we moved back in 1994. We went back to work in the Napa Valley, and we were, in all told, about 11 years in the Napa Valley. But in that period of time, I started doing a lot of vineyard development consulting for growers all over Northern California, and I discovered Lodi. And so when we bought our first piece of property in Lodi, we thought, okay, what are we going to plant here? What defines who we are? And I thought of that varietal collection that we had.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and the other thing about it too was that when we were in Europe, we noticed that a lot of families in Europe, the Vineyards, they would grow their grapes, they'd prune their grapes, they'd bring the grapes in and make their own wine. And in California, you had this model of either you're a grape grower or you're a winemaker. And there was almost an antagonistic kind of relationship between the two. Mm-hmm. And we preferred the European model. So we thought at some point in the future, we don't want to just bring the cuttings in, but we want to start our own winery. So in 2000 is when that adventure started. In the year 2000, we had our very first vintage of Tempranillo.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's great.
Very
18
exciting.
years now, right?
Yeah. 19 full years now.
You said something interesting. Joseph Phelps. When were you there?
I was in Joseph Phelps from 1989 to 1992.
Because I had Bruce Nyer in here not too long ago, and his, famous Bruce Nyer, his first job, like in 60-something, was the sales manager of Joseph Phelps.
Yes, he was, and he was there during my tenure. Yeah.
So he was standing right where you're standing, and he says, I used to call on your father. I'm like, what? He goes, yeah. He goes, sales manager back then, you loaded your station wagon with wine, and you drove to L.A., and you went to 5 stores. You went to Palisades Wines and Spirits, Duke of Bourbon, Wally's, and a couple others, and you drove home, and that was the sales manager's job. I go, that's amazing. I go, how was my dad? He goes, tough, but fair. I'm like, okay. So
that's quite a compliment.
Yeah, I was.
So Bruce now he buys Zinfandel from our Vistalina Vineyard Zinfandel.
Oh, I just got a case of a Zin.
That is our fruit.
How about that?
Yeah, that is our fruit from Lodi.
Is this the same fruit that we're going to taste here or no?
No, this is from an old vine vineyard.
Okay, right.
That is a younger vineyard. It's actually a Primitivo selection, and in my estimation, I think Primitivo does phenomenally well in California.
It's a gorgeous wine.
And certainly in Lodi. This is an old vine selection. This is the Kirscherman vineyard, actually owned by Tegan Pasalacqua, who is the winemaker to Turley.
We'll get to that. This, but that's something else you said. Your wife was studying French.
Yes.
Which is what I'm studying now.
Oh, good.
So I need to speak with her. But she went to Spain to teach English. How did that work out?
Well, she did a minor in Spanish.
Oh, okay.
Because she did a major in French and a minor in Spanish, and the idea was to go to Spain to just perfect her Spanish, and then come back, and then go into the teaching system. And so it was very funny because it took me forever. It took me a full month to try to find a job in Napa Valley without a viticultural degree, just a plant science degree. My wife walked into Napa High School, and there was a clear sign on the door that said "Not hiring." And she walked in with a French minor and a French major and a Spanish minor, and they said, "Well, that's unusual. We actually have a part-time French and part-time
we need
ESL. Yeah, you're hired." Which was great.
That's classic, actually. And I've been studying French for 4 years now, just because my dad speaks French, and back in his day, and he grew up in Cairo. That's what you did. You just learned 5 languages. That's pretty normal, right?
Yeah,
but for
yeah,
Americans,
yeah.
it's a totally different world.
Yeah, it's unusual. It is unusual. She has now since learned Catalan, which is the language of my family.
Wow.
And so she speaks Catalan, which she really
that's
enjoys.
fascinating.
So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us about this garnacha. This is not the garnacha of France. It's a totally different structure, but it's gorgeous.
Thank you very much.
You won some awards with it or something.
We have. In fact, the reason why we focus on garnacha is because we come from some fishing villages and rice-growing villages that are really where the Ebro River comes out into the Mediterranean. And the closest denominación de origen, the closest wine-growing region to us is known as the Terra Alta. And the Terra Alta, if it's known for anything, it's known for its garnacha and its garnacha blanca. And so, as an homage to our area, I needed to grow a garnacha blanca because I'd grown up with it.
It's fuller bodied, the weight's great, the complexity actually is elevated compared to some of its European counterparts.
And this is 100% garnacha blanca, stainless steel fermented, and we get a little bit more of that weight and mouthfeel through batonnage. So we leave about 5% of it in neutral oak barrels and ferment in the barrel and then do batonnage to be able to get that weight that I think anchors it. There's one thing, though, that we have never been able to achieve in our garnacha blanca in California, and maybe it's site-specific to the Terra Alta, but just like a good Albarino has a little brininess, so do the garnacha blancas of the Terra Alta, and we have yet to figure it out, but
Is it a coastal town, the Terra Alta? No.
The Terra Alta is not coastal. It's about an hour into the interior, and it sits at about 2,000-foot elevation. But it has these summer winds that come off of the Mediterranean.
Well, there you have it.
Yeah, and that's
that
really
salt
where that
air
comes
makes
from.
a difference.
Yeah.
The Sicilian wine, Sardinia, Corsican, they all have this savoriness about them.
Yeah.
From that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You said something earlier too, which I just thought of. You studied plant sciences at Berkeley, right? No, not Berkeley.
Davis.
At
Davis.
My dad came to America on his plant sciences background as a chemist. Then he got a job at USC because he studied plant-based chemistry. That was his whole thing, and maybe that's why you guys make good wines. You just have a palate for it.
UC Berkeley is the agricultural college for California, and Davis was the agricultural campus to UC Berkeley until it itself became its own university. And there was quite a few Egyptians actually, or professors.
Yeah, well, there you have it.
Yeah.
All right, so this is fascinating. There's 2 things on here. One is these gorgeous Spanish varietals being grown in Lodi, because you typically get Zin and Chardonnay.
That's right.
That's pretty much it. And then you've also got this sustainable certification on the back, and I've been studying this. We talked about it a little bit off camera, because there's a whole bunch of movement about natural wine, sustainable, biodynamic, organic, all the different levels. But this is a fascinating thing because this is a third-party
That's true. It's a
watchdog, so to speak.
Third-party watchdog, third-party audited type system. So often, many of these self-proclaimed certifications are kind of a pat on the back. But fortunately, in the Lodi area, we early on, in the early 90s, started the idea of integrated pest management. So that idea existed and was very, very popular at agricultural universities such as Davis, but to actually implement it, to really understand how to use pesticides in their most sustainable way, so that you are looking at the stewardship of a property as opposed to just taking care of a pest and, for that matter, anything else that's living on the property.
When you say stewardship, in other words, the sustainable would be getting the property to regenerate itself by minimizing how much you put into it. And this is what this scoring system we're talking about. Because in the book by Dan Berger, the chef in the Blue Hill, Dan, oh my God. Anyway, he talks about this, and you have a scoring system that says, all right, if you're going to put this pesticide to kill this pest, you're now going to be restricted on how much you can put of other things. And so you try to be more targeted with, is that what you were talking about earlier?
Absolutely. You want to be very targeted with pest control because, let's face it, when you have, as an example, the Terra Alta Vineyards, 100 acres of contiguous wine grapes, so in essence it's a monoculture. And whenever you have a polyculture, you have things that are much more in balance. When you get into a monoculture, things can fall out of balance much more quickly. And how do you control that? That's really the question. So are you going to spray from property line to property line, or are you going to say, I have hot spots here and I'm going to use a more targeted pesticide to take care of a powdery mildew outbreak or a spider mite outbreak? And so you use less pesticide. And that's very important because there's a point system, as you mentioned, and that is that you're allowed to 50 points, and that's it. And every pesticide has a point accumulation. So if you get beyond 50 points, which is very easy, then you can get kicked out of the system and you lose your certification. But that's only one way of losing your certification. You also have to have these very, very thought out plans on how you're going to farm, and you have to have every year you have to study your well water and your pump efficiency. You have to see whether you can use some renewable resources for electricity, like running your pump. Mm-hmm. So it's very complex, and essentially it's a point system. And if you're under certain points, you then
so
are selected.
It's not that organic builds on that. It's different in a biodynamic for sure. But or do organic farms and or biodynamic farming need to start with sustainable farming? Or is it a separate thing completely?
They're very, very different things. Yeah. However, all of them are preferred to nothing. So, as opposed to a default form of farming, whenever you're doing sustainable farming, or when you're or organic farming, or for that matter, if you're in the Demeter Society, it makes you think about all the decisions that you take. And as soon as you start being a little more intellectual and thinking about your impact to the environment, it's going to help the environment. So, I'm a proponent of people really looking at certifications because it makes them understand their vineyard. And when they understand their vineyard, then you're going to get more uniformity of quality and better wines.
That makes sense. Tell me about this Graciano. I mean, I could tell you in that computer you saw me inputting the wines in downstairs. There's maybe a dozen Gracianos in there, maybe a little less. How did you come to bring Graciano to Lodi? That's just fascinating.
I think I have to give the first shout out to Jancis Robinson. Because
really?
Because I had her book, and back in '89 I was reading about the best Tempranos historically and what they had been composed of, and all of the old ones, somehow Graciano slipped into the story. And so I thought, what is this Graciano? It's certainly not in California, and we need to bring this to California. So it was certainly one of the ones that I had targeted when I was in Spain into the collection that I brought to the Penedès, and then I brought it over to California. So we were the very first to make a Graciano, to plant a Graciano. And in fact, oddly enough, we never thought that it was not going to be a registered variety. And so our very, very first Graciano actually had to be labeled Red Table Wine.
Oh, no.
And
but it's such a great representation of it, because the Italian version, the Spanish version is not that much different, except this shows a little more structure to me. Sometimes they're a little more fruit forward, opulent, but it has a spiciness that you typically get from the Spanish version. So it's really fascinating.
The Graciano really helps the Tempranillo in its original form, in being able to bring some of that blueberry, blackberry, dark fruit aromatics.
Right.
It really punches it up. Also, the Graciano has a phenomenal ability to hold on to its acid like the Tempranillo does not. And so it really rounds out and helps the Tempranillo.
They tend to be drying, and they're just Spanish versions that aren't necessarily pedigree. They just, here's some Graciano kind of thing.
Well, and the funny thing with that is that we never thought we were going to make a Graciano by itself.
Yeah, really?
No. We brought it
it's quite elegant, actually.
Be an ameliorator for the Tempranillo, and then we loved it so much.
Yeah.
But initially, we didn't love it because it is one of the hardest varieties to grow. It ripens late. Its buds bud out at different times. The shoot lengths are all odd. You have to probably touch those clusters more than any other variety to be able to get uniformity. And so it's a labor of love, but it's certainly one of my favorite, if not my favorite varietal.
Yeah. Garnacha.
Now,
this is obviously one of the mainstays of the Spanish red flights, typically.
Yes.
And this is, again, another expressive version. I wouldn't know. This is I wouldn't know what Garnacha from from Lodi necessarily taste like anyway.
Yeah.
But it certainly has its own character and its own personality, just the way it is. So tell us about how this came about.
Well, Garnacha came about because, again, this is also very popular in the Terra Alta region. It's also very popular all over northern Spain and southern France, also Sardinia. It's a variety that is really near and dear to my heart, not only just the Garnacha, but the Garnacha Blanca. In the Terra Alta alone, there are 5 different Garnachas in that family. So there's a Garnacha Peluda, Garnacha Tintorera, Garnacha Tinta, Blanca, and Gris. So 5 different Garnachas. This is the Garnacha Tinta, 2 selections, one from the Priorat, and one from an area known as Alfaro, which is in the Rioja Baja. And interestingly enough, they're about 250 kilometers apart, but they look identical in the field. They were both
Really?
old vine selections. And what they had was a looser cluster architecture, lower berry count per cluster, smaller berries as Garnacha goes. And so what we do here is a 100% Garnacha. We don't want to do a lot of blending to deepen or darken the color. We also are very...
Need to.
We don't need
It's
to.
complex. It's got
Yeah.
tons of fruit. It's got great acid. It's very refined for typical Garnacha that we taste around here.
Well, thank you.
It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, and we want to be, as maybe you've noticed already, is what we're trying to do is not create a California rendition of these varieties. What we want to do is we want to create a as close to Spanish rendition of these varieties. So we're true not only to the varietal, but to their area of origin. So
It's interesting that you chose Lodi because I still get from customers, Lodi, isn't that the city in the Creedence Clearwater song, we're stuck in old Lodi again, but and then I think the next impression of Lodi is that it's this hot territory, and it's not really that hot.
oh, it's not at all. It's not at all. I think a lot of people liken it to a hot area because it's in the Central Valley of California.
Right.
And the Central Valley is the single flattest spot on Earth.
Really?
There is no place larger as flat as the Central Valley. But if you look at the Central Valley, it has only one outlet for its entire watersheds. You've got these great sierras, you've got the coastal ranges. They're all draining into either the Sacramento Valley to the north or the San Joaquin Valley to the south. And then they finally break through the coastal range to go into the Bay Area through the Carquinez Straits. Lodi is located very strategically just east of the Carquinez Straits, right by the California Delta. So my wife comes from a little tiny town in the Sacramento Valley, and in the summertime, when it becomes nighttime, the temperature doesn't drop. But when you're in Lodi, you feel that Delta breeze coming in at about 5 in the afternoon, and by 7, in the middle of summer, we're down into the low 50s, high 40s. at
Wow,
times.
that's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And so I remember when we were living in Yountville in Napa, we always had what we called the Carneros breeze that would come in right at 5 o'clock. And the fog would start coming in, and you'd have to go run for a sweatshirt or something to be able to be outside in the summer. Same thing in Lodi. It happens about an hour lag time later. That is it. If you look at the high times in the Lodi area, the high temperature and the low temperatures, they equate to almost exactly the region within Napa Valley between Yountville and St. Helena. But that is just about a 50-mile wide stretch that is affected by sea breezes. If you go north of that or south, you're truly in an area that doesn't cool down as much. So people are right saying that the Central Valley is a warm area, but they're incorrect when they think that Lodi is that way. It's a very unique area.
This Tempranillo does depart from its Spanish compatriots. It seems to be more indicative of a California wine than I would have expected. But Tempranillo, is pretty versatile grape, so it kind of gets around. But usually they're, what's the word I'm looking for? They seem heavier than this. This has got a wonderful complexity and spice in it that you don't always get from Tempranillo in Spain. And of course, in Spain, it can be pretty inexpensive red wine as well, and be lots of fruit, and that can be very sophisticated. So, tell us this particular bottling of the Tempranillo. What's
Well, we brought this Tempranillo in. It's actually a selection that we got from an older vineyard in the Ribera del Duero in Spain.
really sounds good.
Yeah, and we really love Riojas and aged Riojas, and we thought, well, why don't we see what we can do in more of a Rioja style? Well, this is the one variety that really just kind of bends into the California, environment that it's existing in. And so what we found with this Tempranillo is that the original mother block that is planted right in the middle of all these old vine zins is planted in sandy loam soils. And that tends to create a really beautiful floral component. But we took cuttings from that vineyard and planted it on heavier clay soils, clay loams in fact. It's called the San Joaquin series, and that's where you get that tannic backbone. That's where Tempranillo really gets that really wonderful, dry, dusty tannin. It's almost Malbec-like.
Yeah, it's not overdone though, right before the finish, I get this wonderful complexity of spice component.
Yeah.
Right after I'm done spitting, I get wow, it's sort of hanging around.
Yeah, it certainly is a wine that has tremendous staying power too. We recently opened up our 2001 Tempranillo, and it was tasting fresh and beautiful. And in reality, our initial goal was to create a Gran Reserva, so a wine that was aged for 3 years in barrel, and then another minimum of 2 years in glass prior to release. But the journey of Bokisch Vineyards has been a long one, and it took us a good 11 years of custom crushing before we could build our own facility.
Wow.
And in 2014, we finally had full control of our facility, and we started our Gran Reserva. So we haven't released it yet. It has been, again, aged for 3 years in barrel, and now it's aging in its 3rd year in glass. And that wine,
wow.
I'm going to have you try one time, because that is actually getting very close to a Rioja-style wine.
I'd love to taste it.
Yeah.
So far with this lineup, and I've got 2 or 3 customers in my mind right now that I'm trying to break out of Napa Cabernet only drinkers, and these wines would be a great opportunity to get structure, character, flavor, and not be overwhelmed with juicy cassis and all that, but still go, wow, I get this, right? I get these flavors. I understand them because there's so many of them.
Yeah.
This is what I find with most consumers, particularly, that I'm trying to orient them toward the experience of the wine, not I like it, I don't like it.
Yeah.
But what is this about?
Right.
And do I sense those characters? And do I emote from just drinking that? I don't have to explain it, but I feel something when I drink it. These all wines have wonderful personalities that you've created.
Well,
and
thank
this
you.
one is blows the doors open with Zinfandel character. So this limited release it's Tizona.
Tizona, yeah. So I think one of the things that you might have noticed through the lineup here is that, if anything, we really want the fruit to be pronounced, and we don't want to create an overly wrought or awkward wine that is alcoholic and heavy. So we have a very restrained style in all of the things that we do, which I think comes as a surprise to many people who have taken or tasted Lodi wines. Lodi has really matured as an area. But there's one thing that we have not been able to do, because I'm not old enough, and that is that all of our vineyards are at most like 20 years old, right? And to truly do, let's say, a Gran Reserva, you have to have a minimum of 40 years of age on your vines. Well, this is where the Zinfandel comes in.
All right, we'll forgive you.
Because this Zinfandel here was planted way before I was born. It was planted in 1914. It's the Kirschman vineyard, and this is the 2014, so it's the 100th leaf of this vineyard, this very beautiful vineyard.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it really shows a lot.
It's in the character. I mean, you feel like this is history in the bottle.
Well, it's certainly a humbling experience as a grower, because when you're farming younger vines, you're kind of, as with children, giving them guidance, training them, reeling them back if they get overly rambunctious. With old vines, you don't. They basically tell you, hey, if this is a really hot season, a really cool season, a rainy season, their roots are so ramified in the ground that they don't feel those fluctuations like a younger vine. So much like an older person who's experienced a lot in life, they're very even in what they do as long as you treat them well. And so from a grower's perspective, all you do is, again, I love that word, you steward the old vines. You're really offering stewardship to them. You're not reining them in. And I think this Kirschman vineyard is a good example of what Lodi Zinfandel can do when you're really trying to achieve the terroir and that sense of place. So again, very restrained. Our goal is to pick by pH, not by sugar, not by flavor. And we naturally get a wine that is under 15 in alcohol, does not feel hot or heavy, and very fresh fruit.
I've heard that a lot lately, from Burgundy to Bordeaux to now Lodi, that we're picking by pH and the skin, and not unusually. I take home clusters of grapes every night, for a span of a few days, and taste them, and that's what we're picking on, not just putting the sugar meter in the grape and picking by the bricks,
Yeah.
It's been fascinating. We could probably talk longer. So I'd like to just come back, and I'm going to bring some of these in for these clients I'm trying to teach.
Sure.
A little bit.
Great.
With a velvet hammer kind of thing.
I had never heard that term
before. And then, but I'd like to come back, and when you bring the Grand Reserve out, we have to have you back and do this again.
Absolutely, would love to do that.
Mark, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Paul.
you. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.